How sitting too long silently broke my health. Daniel was 38, single, and working remotely as a software engineer. He had a tidy flat, a great monitor, and a chair that hugged him like a glove. Most mornings looked the same. He woke around 8:00 a.m., made instant coffee, shuffled to his desk, and sat. That's where he stayed sometimes until 8:00 p.m. No commute, no distractions, no pressure to wear real trousers, just peace and code. Sitting is the new smoking, articles said, but Daniel laughed that off. Smoking stinks. Sitting feels great. Everything he needed was in reach: keyboard, screens, snacks, and the occasional stretch when his back gave a little groan. But nothing major. He wasn't in pain. He wasn't sick, so he didn't think much about it. At lunch, he'd stay at his desk, eating sandwiches with one hand and debugging with the other. If he needed groceries, they were delivered. If he wanted a break, it was a scroll through social media still sitting. Sometimes he didn't stand up for 4 or 5 hours straight. He'd tell friends, "I'm saving time, I'm efficient." What he didn't notice was how stillness was becoming his daily environment. He thought of rest as a reward, not a risk. He believed stillness meant calm, safe, secure. But slowly, his body was beginning to keep the score. And Daniel didn't know it yet. But sitting wasn't just what he was doing, it was what he was becoming. It started small. One evening, Daniel stood up from his chair and felt a tight pull in his lower back. Nothing sharp, just a slow, stretching ache that made him pause mid-step. He grunted, shifted his weight, and rubbed the spot with one hand. "Just a long day," he muttered. But the next day, it was still there. And the day after that, his legs felt heavier, like they had to remember how to walk again after hours of doing nothing. His knees creaked a little when he climbed the stairs to grab a delivery. Standing up from the sofa after watching TV now came with a wince. Still, he shrugged it off. "This is just what happens in your late 30s, right?" he told himself. Everyone aged. Everyone stiffened up. Everyone joked about needing a crane to get off the couch. He told his friend in a video call, "I just need to stretch more, or maybe get one of those standing desks." He didn't. He forgot. The stiffness wasn't constant, just lingering. And it never screamed loud enough to demand a real response. It whispered, and Daniel was good at ignoring whispers. He sat, he worked, he relaxed, and the cycle continued. Sometimes he'd get out of the chair and feel a slow numbness in one leg, like pins and needles trying to wake up. He laughed about it. "My body's mad I don't use it." But the truth was, his body was slowly adapting to the stillness. Muscles were shortening. Circulation was changing. His core, once decent from regular walks and gym visits, was quietly fading. Daniel had swapped movement for convenience, and his body was starting to push back. Not in dramatic ways, just in quiet, inconvenient aches that warned of something deeper brewing. But Daniel wasn't worried. Not yet. He still believed these were temporary things. Fixable. Harmless. Just the wear and tear of adult life. He didn't realize his lifestyle wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unhealthy. And the signs, once subtle, were quietly stacking up. A few weeks later, Daniel noticed his socks leaving deep marks around his ankles. By afternoon, his feet looked puffier than usual, like they'd been resting in warm water too long. Maybe too much salt, he reasoned, eyeing the empty crisp packet near his keyboard. His posture had quietly collapsed too. Without realizing it, he now leaned into his screen, shoulders curled forward like question marks. When he caught his reflection in the blank screen, he saw a man folding inward, not just physically, but mentally. At first, he dismissed it all. He had a top-rated ergonomic chair, a desk at the right height, a fancy mouse to reduce wrist strain. He'd even installed ambient lighting to reduce screen glare. "I've done everything right," he told himself. But the mirror didn't lie, and neither did his mood. He was snappier now. A friend texted, "You okay, mate? You've been a bit off lately." Daniel didn't know how to respond. Nothing dramatic had happened, no injury, no illness, but inside he felt foggy, edgy, like something was building just below the surface. Still, he brushed it off. He told himself he was just tired, maybe burnt out from work, maybe a bit overdue for a holiday. What he didn't know was that sitting too long wasn't just hurting his back, it was quietly messing with his blood flow, his joints, his hormones, and even his emotions. But Daniel wasn't ready to hear that yet. Not until the next sign hit harder. Daniel hadn't planned to go to the clinic. It was just a routine health check. His company offered nothing serious. He filled out the form, sat in the waiting room, and expected the usual, "You're fine, carry on." But the nurse frowned as she wrapped a cuff around his arm. "Let's take that again," she said. His blood pressure was high. Not dangerously so, but well above normal for his age. Next came flexibility. She asked him to touch his toes. Daniel bent halfway before stiffness in his hips stopped him. She tapped on her tablet. "You're tight all through the lower back and hip flexors. Desk job?" "Yeah," he said. "But I move around. Sometimes." She gave him a look not unkind, but concerned. The doctor joined in next. After reviewing the numbers, he leaned forward and said, "Daniel, your circulation isn't great. Your resting blood pressure's up, and this kind of stiffness, especially at your ages, isn't just aging. It's lifestyle." Daniel laughed nervously. "But I'm not that unhealthy. I walk the dog. I stand up sometimes. I even did yoga once." The doctor didn't smile. "You're sitting yourself sick. You've built your day around stillness. That adds up quietly, but fast." Daniel sat quietly. The words felt heavier than he expected, not because they were loud, but because they were true. Daniel lay on the sofa that evening, the doctor's words echoing in his head. "You're sitting yourself sick." He reached for his phone, opened the health app, and stared. Steps today, 780. 2. Yesterday, 123. The day before that, 604. His finger hovered over each number like it might change if he stared long enough. But no, it was all there, quiet, unmoving. He tapped into his photo gallery. Not selfies, just old pictures friends had taken. From 2 years ago, a barbecue, a museum trip, that weekend hike in the Peak District. In one, he's leaning over a railing, laughing shoulders back, head high, arms toned. His skin looked clearer, his eyes sharper. There was energy in his face. He tilted the phone and caught his reflection in the darkened screen. Now, rounded shoulders, soft chin, dullness under the eyes. A strange slouched version of himself had crept in while he was just working. Daniel sat up slowly, bones cracking with the movement. He rubbed the back of his neck. "When did I start sinking?" he muttered. "And why didn't I notice?" He thought back how each day blurred into the next. How meetings, emails, deadlines had felt more urgent than standing up. How comfort became routine. How his world had shrunk to the space between his monitor and his kettle. He used to walk everywhere. He remembered loving fresh air. He remembered feeling good in his body. But this wasn't a sudden fall, this was a slow slide. And he'd let it happen. Not from laziness, but from habit. From ignoring little signals. From saying later too many times. Daniel stood barefoot on the cold kitchen floor and whispered, "This can't be my normal." Daniel didn't become a new man overnight, but the next morning, he did something small. He set a phone alarm. Every 30 minutes, it would buzz just a soft tonito remind him to stand. At first, he grumbled. It felt silly, unnatural. "Who needs to be told to stand up?" he muttered. But each time it buzzed, he stood. Just for a minute, he stretched his arms, rolled his neck, reached down to touch his toe 7 if his hamstrings shouted in protest. After a few days, he added short walks. Around the flat, down the hall, a loop outside the building when the weather held. He didn't time them, didn't track steps. He just moved. It was awkward at first. His body felt stiff, clumsy, like waking up from a long sleep. But by the end of the first week, something shifted. His knees popped less when he stood. His back didn't groan quite as loudly. Daniel ordered a standing desk converter, just the kind that sits on top of his regular desk. He wasn't ready for a full overhaul, but he wanted to try. He started standing for his morning emails, sitting for deeper coding sessions, and then standing again after lunch. "I just need to stay upright more than I used to," he told himself. He also downloaded a simple journaling app. Each night, before brushing his teeth, he wrote 3 things. What did I move today? How did my body feel? How was my mood? The answers surprised him. Day 3, walked to the postbox. Ankle sore. But I felt proud. Mood equals better than expected. Day 7, desk stretches, shoulders popped. Also, didn't snap at spam email today. Progress? Day 12, actually wanted to walk. What is happening to me? The act of checking in, of noticing, started to rebuild something deeper than muscle. It rebuilt awareness. He added gentle floor stretches before bed. Just 5 minutes. Arms across the chest, knees to the side. child's pose. Some nights, he almost forgot, but then he remembered the doctor's words. You're sitting yourself sick. So he'd get down on the mat, even if tired, even if sore. The changes weren't dramatic. He didn't post transformation photos. There was no cheering crowd. But Daniel was doing something new. He was making space to live inside his body again. And quietly, with each stretch, each walk, each line in his journal, he began to believe he could undo what stillness had done. Within 3 weeks, Daniel noticed something unusual. His head didn't throb every afternoon. He hadn't popped a paracetamol in days. His back no longer begged for a cushion every time he sat. The knot between his shoulders had loosened, like someone had gently unwrapped it. More surprising? He could think more clearly. Less fog, fewer mood swings. When he typed, the ideas flowed not perfectly, but easier. One morning, while scrolling online, he found a virtual stretching group people just like him, remote workers trying not to rust in their chairs. The group wasn't intense, just light movement, twice a week, guided by a friendly instructor named Mira who reminded everyone to smile between stretches. He joined. Then came the dancing. It started by accident. He was cooking dinner beans sizzling, rice bubbling, and his playlist shuffled to an old funk song. His hips moved, just a bit. Then his arms. By the time the food was done, he was sweaty, laughing, and grinning alone in the kitchen. Movement stopped being a task. It became joy again. By week 5, Daniel had a rhythm. Stretch, walk, cook, dance, journal, sleep. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, he opened his health journal and wrote, I thought comfort meant safety, but stillness was quietly stealing my energy. He closed the journal, stood up, and walked to the window. Normally, this was the time he'd scroll endlessly on his phone. But tonight, he grabbed his hoodie, slipped into his trainers, and stepped outside instead. The sky was pink, the air crisp. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, sit less, live more. And this time, he meant it. Moral: the body wasn't built for sitting marathons. Move before you're forced to. Follow for more health wake-up stories. Subscribe to take charge of your body before it breaks.